they were helping with OSU long before I came aboard, and I've been here over 30 years. So again, thank you, Charles. Thank you, Linda, if you're listening. Or if not, you'll hear my hopefully acknowledgement on a YouTube at a later date. I'd like to mention that our speaker today, he will take advantage of a 10-minute break when he calls that. So just know at some point we will take a short break where we can walk away. We won't be entertaining questions at that break. But what you can do though is get on your chat feature anytime throughout the balance of this presentation. And at the end, we will do our best to address each and every question or comment that you might have. A couple other housekeeping rules. I need to read my notes so I don't forget. I will say for those of you, well, clearly you've all registered, but if there's a few of the talks that you look back and wish you'd signed up for, you just simply use an alternative or an alternate email, and then you can sign up for the balance of webinars that you might want to enjoy here this year. And then lastly, remind your peers that any webinar that this one or any other that they missed, that the YouTube version should be ready approximately 2 weeks after any given presentation, including today. So with the COVID debacle, we had a greenhouse short course. We had a lot of exciting things set up for last year, 2020, but of course came March of 2020 and we had to really rethink what we could and could not do. Well, that leads to our speaker today. So Dr. Rick was one of those people that was going to give an award-winning talk at our greenhouse short course. So come 9 months later, we finally have found a safe way to bring Dr. Rick to us today to talk about tomatoes. I'm so excited. Dr. Snyder has over 30 years of experience of doing these type of short courses, very specific to greenhouse tomatoes and also other aspects of tomato culture. But he's done those not only in Mississippi, but throughout the country. He's spoken internationally. He knows what he's doing. So we've got the best with us today. And again, Dr. Snyder hailing from Mississippi State University's Crystal Springs to be exact. And you can go back and read his impressive bio. I'm not going to read that back to you because you've had it available since last October. So rather than eating his time, I'd like to welcome Dr. Rick Snyder as he sets out to address, so you want to grow greenhouse tomatoes. So welcome back to Oklahoma, Dr. Snyder. I know you've lectured before, but it's been a while. So we're excited to get you back. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to you, Rick.
Well, Mike, thanks for that great introduction with all the accolades and exaggerations. I really appreciate that.
Sure.
As Mike mentioned, I'm an extension vegetable specialist, and I've been with Mississippi State just about 33 years, working in commercial vegetables for field, but primarily in the greenhouse vegetable area. And my specialty is greenhouse tomatoes, but I help growers with anything vegetable grown in the greenhouse or any of the field vegetables as well as an extension specialist. So today we're going to talk about tomatoes in the greenhouse. I have split it up into two parts so that everybody gets a 10-minute break in the middle, including me. And I'll make it obvious where the break is, and we'll take about 10 minutes at that time. So the first half of the talk is what I like to call tomatiology. So now I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see it. Let's see. There we go. Can that show, does that show up well?
Yes.
It looks good.
Okay. So you want to grow greenhouse tomatoes. Tomatiology is it's a made up word, so you don't have to be using it in everyday language. We're going to cover a lot of the basics of greenhouse tomatoes and a lot of things I've observed from working with growers all these years, questions they've had, problems they've had, and solving them. The second half will look more at some of the problems and solutions. You know, you can learn a lot from other people's mistakes. So that's a great way to learn about this. So next, let's see. Oh, good. For a second, I thought it wasn't advancing. So this is what we're looking for. Nice clusters of beefsteak tomatoes grown to maturity in the greenhouse, 3 or 4 tomatoes on a cluster. Some people call it a hand, but the quality of greenhouse tomatoes is very high. It's higher than field-grown tomatoes. And it is, of course, more expensive to grow than field-grown tomatoes as well. So we're going to hit on all of the important facets of being successful in the greenhouse tomato business. But first I wanted to show you, I know you probably had the same snowstorm that Texas had about a week ago or so. I just want to show you in Mississippi, we had a real blizzard. I mean, this is our van at home, and you can see it's buried in snow. I mean, it took hours to get it out. It was just awful, but we survived. This will forever henceforward be called the blizzard of 2021 in Mississippi. Okay, so from the beginning, why grow in a greenhouse at all? Why bother? You can grow things outside. You have a long growing season in Oklahoma, not quite as long as here in Mississippi, but still quite long. Well, the greenhouses are designed to modify the environment. The main modification is with temperature, but they will also modify the light a little bit on insects, diseases, and weeds. So you have a little bit of control there, not complete control. Air pollutants, if you're in an area that burns a lot of coal, for example, you can keep a lot of those particulates out. And water. Now, why do I say water? Well, in tropical environments, there's way too much rain. We get about 55 inches of rain here. I think you probably get a little bit less in Oklahoma, but in some of the tropical environments, you get several hundred inches of rain per year. So the greenhouse can actually protect the crop from being overwhelmed with too much water and the diseases that they can promote. So the greenhouse allows you to grow a crop when it would be impossible otherwise. And that's why the greenhouse is a year-round or most of the year production facility, unlike high tunnels. High tunnels are also an excellent way to grow crops. High tunnels let you extend the season earlier in the spring and later in the fall. But not too many vegetables will grow over the winter in a high tunnel, since they are not heated. In fact, we can't even grow vegetables in the summer here because of the heat in a high tunnel. And we don't grow them in the greenhouse in the summer either, just too hot. So the greenhouse tomato is a very high quality crop. Why? Well, one of the most important things in sales and marketing now for produce is locally grown. So you have a greenhouse in Oklahoma, you can sell it to your local grocery stores. You could sell it at roadside stands and farmers markets. Locally grown is a very valuable adjective for greenhouse tomatoes. They are vine ripened. These are not picked at the green, also sometimes called breaker stage, but we all know that that's green. And then gas them with ethylene and ship them. Like a lot of tomatoes grown in the much further south than we are, in Mexico, in southern Florida, southern Texas. There are a lot of tomatoes that are grown to the breaker stage, where they just show a tiny little hint of color on the blossom end, hardly perceptible to the human eye. Sometimes they're totally green. And the ethylene makes them turn color, and it softens the cell wall. But the ethylene does not help with the flavor at all. So that's why a lot of winter tomatoes that people despise are these field-grown winter tomatoes that are gassed and shipped. But greenhouse tomatoes are never picked at breaker stage, and they're never gassed with ethylene to soften them up. So in addition, the greenhouse tomato varieties are very well bred, you might say. They have a very uniform size and shape. So they have a good red color from the vine ripening and a really good flavor. So if the pH is paid attention to, and the fertility is paid attention to, and there's good sunlight, the management is excellent, you'll have a really, really good tasting tomato. So that makes it a higher value. So that's why you cannot sell your greenhouse tomatoes for the same price as field tomatoes. They deserve a higher price because your inputs are higher and the quality is higher. So I get lots of calls, and I'm sure Mike gets lots of calls, and your county agents in Oklahoma get calls where people see a newspaper or magazine article with pictures, something like this, and it looks like, wow, these are so productive. I want to get in on some of that, and uh, hopefully I could just plant it and then come back in a few months and harvest and probably make $1 million in the first year or two, and then retire early. Well, it is not an easy crop to grow. And this is something I've been working with all my years at Mississippi State, and also my master's at Ohio State was in greenhouse tomatoes as well. So I've been working with this in this field a long time, and I can tell anybody who wants to do it that this is not an easy crop to grow. There are a lot of things to learn, and the management is critical. Let's look at the demographics of the tomato at this point. This is all of protected culture in the U.S. for food crops. So this would include high tunnels, for example. So the number of growth in operations, it's more than doubled from 98 to 2014. This is from the Census of Horticulture Specialties. And the dollar value is way more than doubled. So it's almost 4 times as much because the value per acre or per pound is much higher for greenhouse tomatoes than field tomatoes. So we've seen enormous growth in the last 20 years, but especially the last 10 years in the US. Now let's just look at the greenhouse vegetables in North America. The tomato is the largest crop in all 3 countries across North America, followed by cucumber, pepper, and then other things like eggplants and tomatoes and basil and other herbs and lots of miscellaneous things. But tomato is number 1. Now look at the rankings. This is production acres, 400 in the US. Now this is based on 2011, so it is a little bit outdated, but the rankings have stayed the same. Canada is ahead of us, but look at Mexico. More in Mexico than Canada and the US combined. Look at the totals here compared to Canada and US. So Mexico has had a faster acceleration of greenhouse tomato production than Canada or the US, and it continues to grow rapidly. And this is the third slide with numbers. So then we're going to get right into pictures and text and describing things in real life. So in this slide, we have the food crops grown under protection in total weight. And again, you can see tomatoes are by far in the lead for weight, 96,000 tons. And then that's total. And then hydroponic, almost all of it is hydroponic, 82,000 out of the 96,000 tons. And the value, $400 million for tomatoes. That's huge. The other crops do add up a lot of value. So you have 800 million based on the 2014 census. So it's a significant crop. The estimates, people ask sometimes, well, what portion of the tomatoes we eat are grown hydroponically in greenhouses? It's in the 10 to 15% range. I don't have an exact figure because the data from the census is a little bit outdated, but in the 10 to 15% range. So growers who want to get into this have a lot to learn before plunging into the hydroponic tomato business. But even after they learn in the beginning and then they start growing, there's way more to learn. You learn stuff every year. You learn by doing, you learn by making mistakes, you learn by talking to other growers and discussing things with them, how they solve problems. And you can grow tomatoes 30 years and you will learn something new every year. Most of the growers in the country are small family-run businesses. We probably have over 1,000 family-run small greenhouse ranges. It could be a couple. It could be a family with an uncle and an aunt helping to work in there. Your kids can help, sometimes cousins and nieces. And you see all kinds of combinations of family help in the greenhouse for these small businesses. So probably over 1,000. But we do have some very, very large ranges in the US, but probably not more than 6 or 8 that I would call huge. To me, huge is over 100 acres in one block. That's a big greenhouse. And we have some that are several hundred acres. We have some that are 60 acres. Those are big. Most of the family run greenhouses are under an acre. Before you can plunge into growing, you really need to figure out where will you sell these tomatoes. I'll give you an example. I had a call last year from somebody who wanted to put in 100 acres of greenhouse tomatoes in Mississippi. And of course, I've been through this so many times. I asked, have you grown them before? Well, it was a no. Have you worked for a greenhouse company before where you no? And then I have to go right to the bottom line. Where will you sell 100 acres worth of greenhouse tomatoes? Because you'll be shipping trailer loads every day. And that's more than anybody in this state could possibly consume. So you'll have to be shipping trailers to Chicago and New York and maybe California, although that's sort of far. So it really needs to be planned out. Where will you sell your tomatoes? Where are they going to go? You need a home for them. You need grocery stores, or like we were talking about earlier, farmers markets, roadside stands, produce stands that can buy your produce and resell it. Do you want to be wholesale or retail? That's important because if you're a people person, you might want to be retail. If you're retail, you can charge more per pound. You can make more money that way. If you're not too big to sell retail, if you have an acre, you probably will have trouble selling all that retail. Wholesale is perfect if you don't want to talk to every single person who wants to buy your tomatoes. If you're It's a personality thing. Some people don't like to chit chat for 20 minutes just to sell 5 pounds of tomatoes. That will be a problem. So if you don't like that people contact, you should wholesale your crop to at least one store. Now, a lot of growers actually do a combination. A very common way to do it is maybe a third to a quarter to a third is retailed, and the rest is wholesale. And I like spreading out the market that way to make sure that you have sales. So you can guarantee the wholesalers what they request each week. And then anything that you're not selling through them, you might have a stand set up right at the greenhouse or sell them in some other way, but direct to the consumer. You want to look into the market first and see what the needs are. Like if you go to the grocery store and you notice they have a whole bunch of greenhouse tomatoes from somebody right in your own county or the next county, and they're well stocked. Well, they might not need another supplier. Well, you might have to check some other stores and see if they have any. If you go in the store, by the way, and they have some tomatoes and they have a sticker on them that says British Columbia or Ontario or Mexico, well, there's your toe in the door. You can tell them, look, I can grow the same thing and deliver to you the same day it's picked, and it won't cost you as much. They'll be vine ripened and locally grown, and your customers will like them because we can say it's grown right here in this county. So that's a foot in the door. Let them know. If you're a small grower, you really do have an advantage in going into small stores. I don't know what your small stores are, but in Mississippi, the big sort of a joke is Piggly Wiggly. We have Piggly Wigglies scattered around the state. Lately, some have gone out of business, and another chain is Ramey's. These are small town stores, towns with like 5 to 10,000 people. These stores are everywhere. So the wholesalers are more likely to go into Costco, Walmart, Sam's Club, Kroger, these big chain stores. They're not going to go into your local Piggly Wiggly type store. So there's an advantage if you're in a small town with low population. Your local store will probably love to sell these tomatoes. So finally, have alternative buyers. Sometimes a store will find out you're growing greenhouse tomatoes and they'll give you a call and they'll say, wow, I'd like to sell those. Okay, how many boxes would you like? I will take everything you have. I'll take all you got. That's a very common thing for a store to say because they want them bad. So, okay, so you pick 18 boxes, you bring them to the store, and the manager says, we'll take 4 this week. Check back with us next week. So what do? You have a bunch of boxes left. Um, don't call your county agent and say, where do I sell these? You know, you have to do this ahead of time. So that's why you want to have alternative buyers. Have a list of stores, and even if you're only picking a few boxes a week, split them up. So you have at least 2 buyers. Get educated. Well, you're doing that right now. You're doing a great job. So this was the thing to do to sign up for this fantastic session that Oklahoma State is doing for you. Read extension publications. There are several good ones out there. I give you free access to all of mine on the Mississippi State website, and I'll tell you how to get to them later. No charge. For my closest friends from Oklahoma, read some books on hydroponics or greenhouse tomatoes. There are some newsletters out there. Definitely visit growers. But what I like to tell people is don't just drop in on a grower who's 30 minutes from your home and tell them that I'm going to go into greenhouse tomatoes and I can't wait to get into it. Tell me everything you know and all your secrets. Well, what are you doing? You're telling that grower that you're going to go head-to-head competition with them and probably try to sell in the same stores. They don't want that, and you wouldn't want it either. So find out if they're selling local stores. Don't try to steal the stores away. Find other stores. Everybody's got to work together with this. Otherwise, you end up undercutting, and then nobody makes a profit and somebody goes out of business. Anyway, I think it's better to visit production greenhouses that are not really, really close to your home. Find one that's an hour away. Find one that's 2 or 3 hours away. They'll tell you probably everything you want to know. Growers are very amiable. They're happy to help you. But make an appointment first. Don't just drop in. Call them up. Tell them what you're planning. Maybe your agent can make a connection with you or your specialist can make a connection, and it works much better that way. Internet, there's a lot of information on the internet. Some of it is even true. So that's a good way to look things up. Find some answers. YouTube is excellent. Facebook page. I have a Facebook page. I'll show you the link later, but there are plenty of good ones. Grower conferences like this. And don't be afraid to go to a grower conference in another state. If there's one in Arkansas or Texas or somewhere not too far from you, go to it. You can learn a lot. And I do have a DVD set that we sell here. I'll tell you about that later if you want it. It's from a greenhouse tomato short course, that I ran here for 28 years. I stopped doing it last year because 28 years seemed like enough time to do the same program. Okay, the structure. You need a greenhouse. So the structure is very important. I'll show you how to get a hold of the Greenhouse Tomato Handbook at the end of this. You can download it or read it online. The last few pages of the handbook is a vendor list. So it has lists of greenhouse construction companies. It has a list of fertilizer companies, seed companies, irrigation companies, and anything you would want in the area of greenhouse supplies. So just look through that list and get several quotes, just like buying a pickup truck. Hopefully you don't take the first offer. You'll get a quote, go visit another dealer, and get a good price. So figure out what size you want. That's the first step. Greenhouse widths go in even numbers: a 22, a 24, a 30, a 32 foot wide. You probably don't want to go wider than 32 feet because of structural integrity and the way that plastic is sold. The length, 100-foot greenhouse is what you're looking for, but you know what? It's not 100 feet. It's actually 96. So why 96? because plastic is sold in 100-foot rolls. So you need that 2 feet at either end to fasten it to the greenhouse without pulling it so tight that it rips. So the plastic is 96 feet, the green is 100 feet, the greenhouse is actually 96 feet long. So common sizes are 24 by 96 or 30 by 96, but figure out your size and get the quotes based on the size. Site location, this depends on how you're selling. If you're selling retail, you want to have good access to the public, not like 5 miles down a country road where people have trouble finding it. If you're selling wholesale, you just want to be able to get your trucks on the road and get to your markets. And then the site itself has to have drainage. Plan for 1 to 2% slope. You don't want water to stay in the greenhouse. It has to get out, and there will be a lot of surplus water that the plants cannot use. So plan for drainage, know where the water's going to go. Language. There's a whole terminology for greenhouse tomatoes, and just like there is for any technology or science. So a few years ago, I put together this greenhouse tomato growers glossary. And in this, if you're a beginner, you want to know what a truss is, what an internode is, a peduncle, what's ppm. So this has all of those, and it was just revised a few months ago with a lot of disease terms. So if there are any pathologists tuned into this, you'll be happy that it covers dozens of disease terms as well. And it's good for the growers too. Like if you have a problem, a disease, you send it to your lab and they say, well, the sclerotia are visible. What the heck is sclerotia? Well, you can look it up in this glossary and see. If you think of words that you think should be in it and they're not, just send me an email and I'll probably put them in as long as they're related to greenhouse tomatoes. How big? Well, the most common thing people say, I'm going to put in an acre. I'm going to put in 12 greenhouses. I'm going to put in a 2-acre range. And once again, I say, well, do you have experience doing this? Because an acre is a lot. I mean, that's 10,000 tomato plants to take care of all by yourself. No, never done it before, but I've grown a few tomatoes in the backyard, so I think I'm well qualified. No, that doesn't happen that way. So I always tell people, start small, start with 1 bay preferably, maybe 2, but not 6 or 12, not several acres. So this is the only grower who ever listened to what I said. And, he said, well, you said to start small. So this guy had such a good year, his first year, that by the next year, he was able to double in size. And that's what we like to see. Start small, start with 1 bay, work out all the kinks, and maybe in a year or 2 or 3, you can double in size, add another bay, add 2 more bays. But you don't want to make mistakes on 12 bays or 6 bays. It will take you under. You'll lose your shirt. So start small. Who's going to do all the work? There is work. There is a lot of work involved. The average labor in a greenhouse is 20 hours per week over the life of the crop. Now, this doesn't mean that every single week you'll have 20 hours of work. This is for 1 bay, 1 greenhouse. In the very beginning, after you transplant, you won't have anywhere near 20 hours a week. You might have 5 hours of work per week, but you're not picking yet. You're not pollinating yet. You're not leaning and wrapping. You're not tying the plants up. You're not picking and packing and grading. In other words, there's not a lot of labor. But later on, when you are harvesting, you're also at the same time pollinating, you're leaning and wrapping, you're working with pruning the lower leaves off, the lower 3 leaves on the plant. You're working on grading your harvest. You're working on packing it in nice, neat boxes. you're working on deliveries, there's so much to do, it will be more than 20 hours a week. So can you do it by yourself? Maybe. If you have 1 or 2 bays, you could do it by yourself. If you're working full time in another job, you may or may not be able to handle 2 bays. If you like getting up real early and staying up late, you can probably do it. So will you have family labor, also known as free labor? If you have family labor, a husband or wife, nephews, uncles, Bubba next door, anybody who can help you do some work in exchange for some culled tomatoes, maybe that'll work. But if you need to hire labor, should it be part-time or full-time? If you're really small, like 2 bays, 3 bays, 4 bays, you probably want to stick to part-time labor. And if you're bigger than that, look at full-time labor. You don't want full-time labor when you're really too small to afford it, or the only person who will make money on your crop is the labor, and you won't make any. There will be nothing left for you. And then be sure the labor is available when you need it. So you have to know, when will you start picking? When will you pollinate? What time of day? What day of the week will you do leaning and wrapping? What are your picking days? Are you picking Mondays and Thursdays? Are you picking Wednesdays and Saturdays? You got to let them know. Make sure they're lined up and raring to go. Temperature control. We said earlier that temperature is the main thing that the greenhouse is able to control. So this is an important number, 64, that's Fahrenheit. You want to make sure in your winter months, fall, winter, early spring, that you don't fall under 64. Will the tomatoes grow in the 50s? Yeah. Will they grow in the 40s? They sure will. Will they grow in the 30s? Yep, they will. Not below freezing. But the thing is, they won't grow very fast and they won't grow very well. And then when it gets into those cooler temperatures, even 60, the quality of the fruit goes down sharply. One of the things you get, it's called rough fruit. It's when there are ridges along the top. So you don't really want ridged tomatoes. You might want ridged potato chips, but you don't want ridged tomatoes. It's not a good thing. And then you will need exhaust fans. And in the South, like where we all are, it gets hot. So your goal is to keep it under 90 whenever possible. 75 to 80 would be even better, but we know when it gets into the late spring, it's really hard to keep it under 90 in a greenhouse. The greenhouse will be warmer than it is outside. It's really hard to get it cool when you have a full solar load and you have plastic holding in the heat, etc. Vents are where the air comes in. So the exhaust fans are at one end of the greenhouse blowing out, and the vents are for intake of air to replace that hot air that's going out. HAF is horizontal airflow. It's a type of fan that will move air within the greenhouse. It stirs the air, it mixes air from hot spots and cool spots so that the temperature is more uniform. And it also has the benefit of drying off the leaves. We will talk about that later, but you don't want a lot of moisture on the leaves because that promotes diseases. There are also vertical airflow fans, by the way. So you need 2 to 4 horizontal airflow fans per bay. 4 is much better. Shade materials. If you're in a hot climate, you want to use shade in spring, and you want to use shade in the fall. And I think Oklahoma is a lot like Mississippi, where it's just too hot to grow through the summer. Unless you have a higher elevation area where it's cooler. I'm not sure about that. The pad and fan system, also called evaporative cooling, is a nice way to cool the greenhouse some more by using water dripping through some cardboard at the end and sucking that water through. So the water vaporizes and then it blows out. Fogging is even better. Fog nozzles put on top of the crop will vaporize. And when water turns to water vapor, it absorbs heat. So that water vapor will be blown out of the greenhouse with your exhaust fans, and it will take the heat with it. How many plants should I grow? So this is one of those questions that always comes back with a question. How many plants should I grow? How big is your greenhouse? So this is an easy calculation. I like 5 square feet per plant. This is what my master's research was on, plant population at Ohio State, at Worcester. And this is one of the things I researched. So I like, if it's 5 square feet per plant, multiply the length times the width. That tells you how many square feet in the greenhouse, and then divide it by 5. That's how many plants you can grow. So if you had a 24 by 96, it would be 460 plants, give or take. It doesn't have to be exact. 30 by 96, about 576 plants. If you're using the lay flat bags, that would be 3 or 4 plants in a 2 cubic foot lay flat bag. If you're using upright bags like these, a 5 or a 7.5 gallon bag will hold 2 plants comfortably. You don't want to try to squish them in to get more plants. Notice the V formation. The bags are here. There are 2 plants in a bag. One goes this way to the left, and one goes this way to the right. The way you accomplish that is by putting the wires, the support wires overhead 3 feet apart. So even though the plants are just a few inches apart in the bag, the wires are 3 feet apart. So you're training the plants to string that is in a V formation. And that allows light penetration into the crop. So you get much better photosynthesis with that light penetration. So your average spacing in the row is about 14 inches from stem to stem, average. How about varieties? Oh my goodness. Here's a question I hate this is a home garden question. What's the best tomato to grow? I can't answer that. Everybody has different preferences, and there have been, over the years, 20,000 tomato varieties, give or take. Not all of them are still on the market. Some are gone, but there are about 8,000 varieties still on the market. So is there one best tomato? No. Is there one best car? Well, maybe there is. I don't know. But there's not one best tomato. There's a lot of variety in size, shape, color, how you use the tomato, what you're going to do with it, etc. So for greenhouses, you want to be careful and pick a good variety for the greenhouse. So you want a greenhouse variety. Can you take a field, or can you take a home garden tomato like Better Boy or Celebrity and grow it in the greenhouse? Yes, it will grow in the greenhouse. Will it grow as well as a greenhouse variety? No way, it won't. You won't get the same yield, you won't get the same quality, and the garden varieties in general are way more susceptible to diseases. The greenhouse varieties have been bred for excellent disease resistance. They have more resistance in them than anything grown in the field or the home garden. The breeders are mostly in Holland and Israel, and they've done a really, really good job. So the greenhouse tomatoes have good yield and size. The beefsteaks are in the 8 to 10 ounce range, and that's what a lot of the market is looking for. Good red color. Do tomatoes come in other colors? Sure, but most of the market wants red. And then free of disorders. This is a disorder. We have cracking and we have splitting, 2 things going on. This is a disorder. We have catfacing. So you don't want a lot of that. And the breeders have gotten rid of a lot of that with greenhouse tomato varieties. So for greenhouse production, red, indeterminate, you want it to keep growing. You don't want it to just get a few clusters and then quit. So indeterminate, beefsteak type, the bigger ones. You can grow Roma, cherry, or grape tomatoes if you have a market for them. If you have a good market, you can charge more per pound than the beefsteak and make up for it. But you don't want to put in a greenhouse of cherry tomatoes and sell them for the same price as beefsteak tomatoes. Why is that? Well, a pound of beefsteak tomatoes is two tomatoes, round numbers. A pound of cherry tomatoes is about 16. So it will take a lot longer to pick a pound of cherry tomatoes. Same with grape tomatoes. So if you're selling them at the same price as your beefsteaks, you're probably losing money with every pound. So be careful of that. The US does not grow a lot of cherry tomatoes in greenhouses because of the labor, but we are the biggest consumer of hydroponic cherry tomatoes. Where do we get them? Manufacturing? No, we get them from Mexico. Mexico has hundreds of acres of greenhouse hydroponic cherry tomatoes, and they pick them just for us. They ship them to the US. Their labor costs are a lot lower, so they can afford to do it. And we are glad to pay for it because we love our cherry tomatoes. So deviate from these based on market demand. If you can get a better price, go for it. So what varieties? This is very specific. These are greenhouse varieties. There's been a lot of mergers among seed companies lately, as there have been for years, but even more lately. So some of the best varieties I have crossed out, no longer available, gone. In fact, one of my favorite varieties has been Trust, and it's in a phase out phase right now. The company that it was DeRuyter and then Seminis Monsanto. So they eliminate varieties that they're not making enough money on. And that's one of the ones that got cut. But if you can still find Trust seeds, I would get them. If not, I like Big Dina and I like Geronimo. So those are my top three. All of these are acceptable varieties too. So you try to get a good variety. If you want to grow clustered tomatoes, where you harvest the whole cluster, any of these are fine. This one is orange, okay, Orangara. But unless the store says we definitely want to buy clustered tomatoes, don't bother. Just grow the beefsteak types. This is a nice pack out. The pack is represented by good color, uniform shape, uniform size. In some areas of the country, this is the calyx. The calyx is left on. This is very popular in Ohio. It's very popular in Ontario, probably Canada in general. They like to leave the calyx on. Most of the US, we don't leave the calyx on. But if you're going to a produce manager in a big store, and that manager may know exactly what he wants. He said, if they're from the greenhouse, leave the calyx on. Okay, leave it on. So it's whatever the store wants, but generally around the US, you don't. Growing medium, what will you grow these tomatoes in? There are several really good choices. We have good growing media. In this part of the country, the Gulf states, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, a lot of it is pine bark. And the pine bark is composted fines. In other words, it's the smaller pieces, 3/8 of an inch diameter and under, and they've been composted for a minimum of 3 months. And it's a very good growing medium, and it doesn't cost a whole lot. So if you can get that, go for it. The next most popular growing medium, it's next most popular here in Mississippi is perlite, but this one is more popular in the rest of the country. So I would seriously look at perlite. The good thing about perlite is it's very, very lightweight. So you don't have to haul around 80-pound bags, to fill your tomato bags. So I would look at that. Coconut coir is another excellent medium to grow in. This is the shredded husk of the coconut. It is a lot more expensive than perlite or pine bark, but if it's available and you can get a decent price, I would look at it. If you're not sure what to go with perlite. Rock wool is what most of the large 100-acre ranges use because it's very lightweight. It comes in slabs. It's easy to handle. You can pick up one in each hand, but it is more expensive than perlite or pine bark. So it's a cost benefit analysis. And then peat light mixes. This is where you mix peat and vermiculite, maybe some perlite in there, and you can buy mixes like that commercially, but like big bales of it. And then soil, I don't recommend growing in soil. The worst thing for plants is soil. I know that's an awful thing to say, but in the greenhouse, soil is not good because it has all kinds of bacteria and fungi in it, and plants can get diseased with soil-borne diseases. So in the field, you have to use soil. In the home garden, you have to use soil. But in the greenhouse, you can do better. You can eliminate a whole bunch of diseases by using a soil-less culture, a culture that doesn't have soil. Sand, forget it. We used to have growers who filled up buckets with sand. So one 5-gallon bucket weighed about 80 pounds. Okay, let's fill 500 of those today. Now that is backbreaking work, and the sand is not that good. It drains too fast, and depending on the source of it, it may have bacteria as well. The right tools, everything you do has tools of the trade, and these are what I call the top 4. So these are the ones you have to have. You need some way of pollinating, either a pollinator, and you can buy these from greenhouse supply houses, or bumblebees. And you can buy these from greenhouse suppliers or directly from bumblebee suppliers. One of the companies sells this brand. The bumblebees do a great job. It costs more than a pollinator, but if you're more than, say, 2 or 3 bays, it will save you a lot of work. So your time is valuable too. If you're 1 or 2 bays, I would definitely just use a pollinator and save the cost of the bees. What's so good about bees? Suppose you have a ½ acre, you don't want to pollinate by hand. You put those bees in and they work from sun up to sundown. They do not require bathroom breaks, coffee breaks, lunch breaks, supper breaks. They just work. So they're very efficient at getting the pollinating done. Next, you need a thermometer. In fact, the thermometer should be a high-low thermometer that records the high and the low until you reset it, like with a push button. And that's important because if you call your agent or specialist and you say, oh, my tomatoes just are not setting fruit, and you're in the winter, they're not setting very well at all. And the agent or specialist says, well, what was the low temperature last night? And if you say, well, the thermostat set on 64, well, guess what? That doesn't answer the question because thermostats are not really accurate. So the only way to know is to have a high-low thermometer. And then you can check and see, well, I had the thermostat at 64, but it got down to 58 last night. Well, there's your problem. The thermostat isn't accurate. So you want to bump it up a little bit and watch it every day until you get that minimum of 64 in the greenhouse. And these are meters that measure EC and pH. pH is how acidic your fertilizer solution is, and EC stands for electroconductivity. It's a big word that tells you how much fertilizer is dissolved in your water. So you might get an EC reading of 1.5 or 2. The units are millimos, and that's in the handbook. I have a really thorough explanation of the units. You want to make sure it's within a reasonable range, not too high, not too low. Then the irrigation system, you have to have water and you have to have fertilizer. So in a greenhouse, the fertilizer is dissolved in the water. So you irrigate with a very dilute fertilizer every single time you put water to the plants. So that's called fertigation, fertilizer and irrigation. There's more to it than it looks like. And it does need to be automated. You're not going to go plant to plant every day with a breaker and hand water. So design your system with an irrigation engineer. And these engineers are available with all of the main irrigation companies. And they will help you design the system, what kind of tubing you need, what kind of emitters to pick, water filters, and then designing how to fertilize your crop, either with a bulk tank, which means one big tank where the fertilizer is mixed in there, or with injectors, either a simpler injector system like this, or a very complex injector system like this. There are different brands, and you don't need to spend a fortune for injectors. These actually work very well. Decide if you want bulk tank or injector and talk to your supply company to help you decide. Excuse me. Fertilizer nutrition. You want to use a fertilizer designed for hydroponic tomatoes. Don't get stuck making this common grower mistake and use Peter's 20-20-20. Nothing wrong with Peter's 20-20, but by the way, but it's made for ornamental plants and bedding plants, and it's very good at that. Not good for greenhouse tomatoes at all. It's the wrong ratio. It's too low in nitrogen. It's too low in potassium and phosphorus. It's actually too high in nitrogen. So you need one that is made for greenhouse tomatoes. And there are several of those listed in the greenhouse handbook. The pH, this is where your goal is. You want the pH of the nutrient solution between 5.6 and 5.8. And you're thinking, well, that's sort of acidic, isn't it? Yes, it is. That is the range that most of the nutrients are the most available. Some are more available at low pH, some are more available at high pH, but this is the target to get most of them available in the greenhouse, and the acidity helps the tomatoes have a good acidic flavor. And then to test your work, you want a tissue analysis. Tissue analysis, you take 10 or 12 leaves from throughout the greenhouse, send them to the lab, and you get a report back that tells you how much of the different elements are in the leaves and if it's low or high, and then you can make adjustments. So here's how you do tissue analysis. First of all, this is a golf ball. Okay, now that we cleared that up. So take 10 or 12 leaves, not more than one per plant. You're not trying to defoliate and kill a plant. Select them randomly from all over the greenhouse. Don't take diseased leaves. Don't take bottom leaves that are turning yellow or brown. Forget that. You want normal, average leaves, and you want them all about the same age. So how do you know how old they are? Well, one way is to count down 8 leaves from the top, so they're all about the same age. But a quicker method is what we call the golf ball technique. If you know what a golf ball looks like, look for fruit about the size of a golf ball, then take the leaf right across from it. It's slightly higher. It's going to be higher rather than lower. So right across from it, and it might be an inch or two above. That's the one you want. And the reason I recommend this golf ball method is because those leaves will be the same physiological age throughout the greenhouse. And it's really important to get leaves of the same age to get an accurate test. Okay, that was a water break. Next, suckering your tomatoes. Tomatoes get these suckers. When you grow them in the garden, you have to snap them off so the plants don't get too bushy. Well, I like to start with tomato anatomy because beginners may not know that this is the main stem. This is a leaf. This entire thing is one leaf. These are leaflets. That's leaflet, 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 leaflet. So when the instructions are take 10 leaves, you don't want 10 leaflets. You want 10 whole leaves like this. This is a flower cluster. That's where the tomato fruit will form. This is the growing tip. And I have to point that out because sometimes people, this is more of a home garden error, make the mistake when they're suckering or removing this. If you remove the growing tip of the plant's not going to grow anymore. So you're really ending its life. So don't take off the growing tip. Take off these suckers. Every leaf has a sucker, also known as an axillary shoot or a side shoot at the base of it. So here's one, here's one. There's a little one just starting in that top axil. Those are leaf axils. So know your tomato anatomy And here's an example of a real life person breaking off a real life sucker. And use your hands. You don't need to use pruners or knives. They will actually spread disease. If there's any disease in there, they'll pick it up and you'll spread it all over the place. Next is flavor. Everybody likes a good tasting tomato, except for those really weird people who won't eat tomatoes at all. And I know a couple of them. I should list their names, but some people don't like tomatoes, but they're deformed. Those people are just bad. Okay, so what makes a good tomato flavor? The correct fertility is really important. So if it's too weak, they'll have a bland flavor. Increasing the EC improves flavor. One time I visited greenhouses in Israel, just by the Negev desert, and the salty sea there. They were using that salt water. You think, well, how the heck can they use that salt water? The EC of the salty water was about 8.0. Just by comparison, you probably want to use fertilizer water at about 2.0. So it's very salty. But they were able to do it with these cherry tomatoes in Israel. And boy, did they have good flavor. Really, really good flavor. Correct pH. Lower pH means more acidic, improves the flavor. Tomatoes have a sweetness and an acidity, and most people like some of each. Some people just like the sweeter tomatoes. Some people like the more acid tomatoes, but they're interconnected. Lots of sun. If there's a period with no sun, like a week of no sun, and then you harvest, you will not get as good flavor. And this applies to things like watermelons too. If you have a rainstorm and then you're picking those watermelons, they will be bland. If you pick watermelons after a dry period, they have a much sweeter flavor. So more sun, more flavor. And now a support system. And this always amuses me because my wife is a social worker. So after I made this slide that said have a support system, I was thinking, well, this really doesn't refer to group therapy, but that might be good too, when you're so busy growing greenhouse tomatoes. So the support system is, how do you keep the plants up so they're not flopping all over the ground? Well, you have wires, and the wires run typically the whole length of the greenhouse. These wires on average are 7 feet off the ground. That's a good estimate. However, if you're 6'4", you can put the wires higher and still reach the tops of the plants. If you're 5'2", make them lower, make them appropriate. But for average, 7 feet is a pretty good height. And then support. How much will the tomato plants weigh when they're loaded with fruit? Well, 600 plants with fruit on them can weigh 3 to 4 tons. So if you have a homemade greenhouse and it's not sturdy enough to support 3 to 4 tons of weight, then you're making a big mistake. So you want to get a frame that is solid, that is professional, or if you're a good welder and mechanic and you can build your own, that's fine. But be sure it will support 3 to 4 tons at one time. I mentioned the V formation before, so the wires are 3 feet apart. And then you tie the strings to the wire on top, and then use a clip and clip the string to the base of the plant. And then once a week, you give the plant a twist around the string, once a week. And that's all it takes. Some people put a clip every time they do it. Once a week, they'll add another clip, and that's fine too. There are special clips made for tomatoes, plant clips. Pruning and training. Train greenhouse tomatoes to one main stem. There are different ways to grow them in the field and in the garden. You can do whatever you want. But in the greenhouse, you don't want so much foliage in there that you can't walk through it. You don't want so much foliage that you can't spray when you need to. You don't want foliage so thick that you have to use 2 hands to burrow in there just to harvest. So you want to control the growth. Train to one main stem. And you do that by removing the suckers or side shoots once a week. And this, I mentioned, to tie the string to the wire and then tie or clip to the base of the plant. Attach the clip under a leaf. You don't want the clip under a flower cluster. Why? Well, with the weight of the plant, it might just tear that flower cluster off. If you remove flowers, you remove fruit. You won't get the fruit. So then once a week, you add the clip or you twist around the stem, always in the same direction. If you're right-handed, you'll do it the same way every time. If you're right-handed and your spouse is left-handed and the other person does it next time and it goes the opposite way, you'll find plants that will slip down the string and break. The stems will break. So if you start clockwise, stick with clockwise. If you have a digital watch and you're not sure what clockwise is, look for a YouTube. Okay, maintain your equipment. This is equipment that you will need. Heaters, unless you're just growing in the spring and fall. But if you're doing that, all you need is a high tunnel at a fraction of the cost. If you're growing through the winter, you have to have a heater and you have to make sure that it works before the cold season comes. So don't install it and leave it off and never try it until it's going down to 32 tonight. And then you turn it on and uh-oh, it won't come on. So try it out ahead of time. You need fans and vents to help cool the greenhouse, emitters for distributing the fertilizer water, injectors and pumps to get the water to the plants. So everything should be checked before the crop. It should be checked during the crop. It should be checked daily. Just go through, see if there's any kind of problem. Now, if your personality is a worrier, perfect. That's the perfect personality for growing greenhouse tomatoes because you will check your work. You'll use a pH and EC meter to check the nutrient solution every day. And right after you mix it, make sure it's right. If it's out of range, you want to be able to fix that before very long. Here's a very simple trick. If you want to know how much water you're giving the plants per day, take a milk jug or a water jug, bottled water jug, a gallon, and put an extra emitter in the line and stick it in that gallon jug. And then once a day, look at it and you can see how much water you got. Did I get a half a gallon or did I get only a pint? And that's simple, but it's valuable information because if you call your agent and you say, my plants keep wilting and I have no idea why. They look so healthy, but they wilt every day between 12 and 2. Well, the agent will say, how much water are you giving them? And if the answer is, I don't know, that's the wrong answer. So you want to have an idea how much water per day. And on average, a mature plant that has fruit on it will need about 2 quarts of water per day. And when I say water, I mean nutrient solution, about 2 quarts per day. So if you're giving them half that and they wilt, that's the problem. So check the greenhouse every day. Look for anything wilting, look for little critters, white flies, crickets, kitty cats, possum, deer, antelope. Just check for anything and so you can catch the problems before they get too bad. Diagnostics. Figure out the problem. So if you have any kind of problem, and you will, things can happen, check with your local agent or area agent. I don't know how you're structured in Oklahoma. I know you have some really good agents and specialists. If anybody in Oklahoma has a phone, do you have cell phones in Oklahoma yet? A lot of them have cameras and you can take a picture and email that picture or text the picture from your phone right to your agent or specialist, preferably the agent because the agent's nearby and might be able to visit you and check. A lot of times people can tell you what's wrong from that picture. However, sometimes the problem needs to be referred to your lab, your diagnostics lab. And in that case, the agent or specialist can forward it right to the lab. It's so easy. Sometimes the lab will say, well, I need to see live tissue and culture it out. So in that case, you'll have to ship the plant or part of the plant. Also, friends in the business. If you're new at this and you have a friend who's been doing it for 10 years, keep in touch. Those friends have been through it before. They've probably been through everything, so they can help you. Now, this has to do with your identity. Remember, when you're growing tomatoes, you're also selling tomatoes because you're in it to make a living. But to sell them, you'd have to market them. So you're not just growing them and then dropping them off at a loading dock or something. You're a marketer. So you need to talk to the produce manager, you need to talk to the store manager. If you're doing farmers markets, you need to talk to your customers and explain what's so good about it. Why does it cost $2.50 a pound? Why does it cost, in some areas like New Jersey, why does it cost $6 a pound? And the price varies depending on the population. So you're a marketer and a promoter and an industry representative. You're telling them you grew these and you grew them locally and they're vine ripened and they taste great. They're really good quality. So all of these are just as important as growing them. So this is redundant, but I want to make sure I drive it home. What's good about them? Vine ripened, good red color, great flavor, locally grown. They're not breakers or gassed. Like a lot of people assume every tomato they eat in the winter is gassed. Greenhouse tomatoes aren't gassed. Uniform size and shape, great nutritional benefits, full of vitamins, including lycopene. Lycopene is the pigment that makes them red. And lycopene has some very good health benefits related to prostate cancer. So there's another big benefit. Excellent quality, and higher quality means higher value. So you're not going to sell these for 39 cents a pound and compete with the imports from Mexico in prime season. You can't do that. They're worth more, so you charge more. Sell quality. Grade your fruit. The number one is your best quality. Coals or number twos are your less than perfect quality, but they're still edible. So your good main customers will take your number one first quality. There may be some buyers in the area who take culls. Some roadside stands might want to take them, sell them for less. I wouldn't sell the ones and the twos to the same buyer because, wow, what if they mix them together and sell them for one price? And it lowers your prestige because people see your name on there and they say, well, those tomatoes weren't that good. Keep the customers happy. Aim for repeat business. That's where the money is, repeat business. Develop a brand name that customers connect with high quality. And you do that by having a logo or a sticker, something so the consumer can identify you and come back for more. So when do you pick? We're getting near the end of this first half. Just a few slides to go. When do you pick? Well, we don't pick greenhouse tomatoes solid green unless you're in Mississippi or other states where people want fried green tomatoes. Well, then you do have some. But we don't pick breaker stage. We don't typically pick at this turning stage. If you're picking for same day sales, red ripe. If you're picking to sell today, tomorrow, 2-3 days, light red. If you are shipping, if you're boxing them up and taking them on the road and shipping to big chain stores, you might do some of this pink because they will still develop into the light red and ripe. Stickers. These stickers you can purchase about 5 for a penny. They're pretty cheap for a 3/4 inch label. And you want to very carefully pick what you put on the label. If you're organic, put organic. Locally grown is a really good thing to put down. Vine ripened is really good to put down. So pick the right thing. You might say vine ripened and then the name of your business on there, so people can remember who you are and ask for more. Now I have resources, and like I promised earlier, they're all on the website, and you can download them and get them. No charge. Greenhouse Tomato Handbook is the one I tell people to read first. Like, don't even bother with all these until you go through the handbook. And I like to tell people this will answer your first 1,000 questions. So you may as well get that done. And then after that, this is a pretty new publication. I'm not in person, so I can't hand it to you, but you can get it off the webpage. tomato troubles, common problems, and we'll talk about a lot of those in the second half. The glossary, I showed you a picture, environmental control. If you want to figure out how to size your fans, your vents, your cooling, it'll help you do the calculations to get everything right. And then this pest management book is for insects and diseases, and it was just revised last year with updated chemicals and and new color pictures. So it's really good. And then the budget, what does it cost to get into this? Well, that's in this publication, Budget for Greenhouse Tomatoes. And there are other publications, but these are the main ones. There's the handbook, También en Español. If somebody needs one in Spanish, send me an email or tell Mike and he'll send me an email. And it is on the website too. I was going to say I'll mail it, but it's on the website in Español. The internet resources. Here's where you can get all the publications. It's that's sort of long, but extension.msstate.edu/crop/commercial-horticulture/greenhouse-tomatoes. But guess what? Just go to Google and type greenhouse tomato Mississippi or greenhouse tomato FAQ. You'll find it easily. It's way easier than typing all that. And I do have a Facebook page here as well. But you can reach everything from this page. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's a DVD set that we did. One year, we had a 3-day greenhouse tomato short course and recorded everything and had it professionally edited and produced. So it takes up 10 DVDs. It's not the kind of thing you sit down and watch all at once. It's really long, but it's some of the best speakers in the country on greenhouse tomatoes. I always brought in people from universities and businesses all over the US. So if you want to get that, send me an email and I'll email back an order form. It's $75 for the set. So with that, that's my last slide. And I think we're all ready for a break, but thanks for your attention. And let's see what time I have on my cell phone. I have 2:13. Why don't we start at 2:25? I hope that's good for everybody. Does that sound about right? Okay, let's aim for 2:25 and then we'll pick up on part 2.
Rick, I'm jumping out, but I'll talk to you in a minute. Thanks.
Okay. I'll jump while you're jumping. I have 225. I'll wait for the go ahead from Mike or Peter or both. Donna.
Go ahead and start, Rick.
Okay. Okay. 225, right on time. I'm going to share that screen. Share and make it bigger. Okay. Hopefully you can see the screen.
Yep, everything's good.
Good. A-okay. We're moving ahead. So this is part 2, more of a problems and solutions talk. So we're picking up where we left off with the how-to, and this is more like, now what do I do? Or what I like to call when bad things happen to good tomatoes. So I think that's really the best title for this. And hopefully you won't have any of these problems. Chances are you will have some of the problems, but don't worry, you're not going to have all of these problems. So first I'm going to show you some ways to make sure you can avoid a lot of these problems. And then we'll look at some individual things and help figure out what happened. So temperature. This is something I mentioned before, but now I'm bringing it into focus with avoiding problems. So how do you know if it's getting too hot or too cold? Your high-low thermometer will help you know, and then you can make adjustments with your thermostats. Make sure everything's working, your vents, your horizontal airflow fans, your shade materials, your pad and fan system or fogging system, which either one you have. And check them out. You're in the greenhouse every day, walking the crop, looking for wilted plants, looking for broken stems. Check the temperatures, check the high and low temperatures. Very, very important. Avoid overcrowding. Now, we talked about 5 square feet per plant in the last talk, but I get a lot of people who say, well, heck, instead of putting 500 plants in there, I'm going to put 1,000 plants in because that way I can double my yield. Well, what really happens is when you crowd them, not even double, but just maybe 20% more plant population, you spend more on your seeds, you spend more on your strings, you spend more on your water, you spend more on your fertilizer, you spend a lot more on your labor, more on your chemicals if you're spraying, you're spending a lot more. And your yield for the greenhouse stays the same. The yield for the greenhouse stays the same. Once you crowd them more than about 5 square feet per plant, the yield per plant goes down. But wait, it gets worse. The quality of the fruit goes down too. And this is some research I did here in my earlier years here at Mississippi State. The quality drops. So you have more culls and number 2 fruit, more small fruit that are undersized. So it really doesn't pay to overcrowd. Water. We need good quality water. Tomatoes also need good quality water. So if you're using public water, if you're using well water, city water, community water, get it tested. So here we have a chemical laboratory on campus and we ship or bring a gallon of water. But let's get down to this. You don't want to take your milk jug that you just finished drinking your milk, whether it's whole milk or skim milk, doesn't matter. That milk sticks to the edges. So don't use a milk bottle. Even if you rinse it out, there's still milk in there. Use a water bottle, distilled water, bottled water, whatever. Use the water or dump the water, put it in the dog's bowl. That's what I would do. But when it's empty, then you want to take your water that you use in the greenhouse, rinse it out with your water, dump that, and then fill it to the top, put a cap on it, tape that cap on really good so it doesn't slip off, and then either bring it or ship it to your testing lab. I don't know if it's on campus or if it's in your with your Department of Agriculture or Department of Environmental Protection, but there should be a lab in state. If there's not a state sponsored one, there are private labs all over the place that will test your water. and tell them what the test is for. The test is for growing greenhouse tomatoes. You don't want them to do a test on potability, like for drinking water. It's a whole different test. So not all water is the same. Water quality can change over time. And this is especially true with community water, because the city water or municipal water, town water, has additives. The person running the water plant has to maintain certain standards and will add various chemicals at different times, like chlorine, to make sure it's clean of bacteria and it's not high in some of the more harmful things like iron and sodium. So it can change. So test it, get a good test, make sure it's suitable for greenhouse tomatoes. Okay, this I covered pretty well in the last one, but take your tissue analysis. When you're new, I would take it once a week. After you've been growing a while, maybe every 2 weeks is fine. And this will help you determine if something is high or low. They will tell you the sufficiency ranges for each element. So you can see if you're within the range or just slightly over, slightly under, may not be a problem, but sometimes you'll find something that's way out of whack, and that's what you want to catch before it goes on too long. Maintaining the equipment in advance of your needs, especially the heaters, but it also applies to the watering system and everything else. Make sure it works. I mean, it seems almost every year somebody will call with a problem where they their heater was in, but it didn't turn on when they needed it. And one time I remember years ago, a grower discovered that his heater was installed way ahead of time, but he never wired it. It was never connected up. So you got to get that done ahead of time. Vented heating is critical. Tomatoes are very, very sensitive to ethylene and carbon monoxide. They're more sensitive than people. They're more sensitive than chickens. And the reason I say that is because people who sell supplies for chicken production sell these heaters that are not vented. In other words, the exhaust goes into the chicken house as well. And the chickens tolerate it. It's okay for chickens. But quote me on this, chickens are not tomatoes. Tomatoes are different. And tomatoes are super sensitive to these exhaust gases. The first thing that happens is they get some twisting of the leaves. It's called epinasty. The leaves will actually flip upside down. But the next thing, they drop flowers. The yellow flowers turn brown and fall off. So what kind of yield will you get if your flowers die? Not very good. So we want to make sure you're vented with a stack either on the end wall or through the roof. You want to stack. So the exhaust gas goes in, the exhaust gas goes outside, and the heat stays in. And regardless of what some companies say, there are no 100% efficient heaters. You'll see this line in a lot of ads. It's impossible. The only really 100% efficient heaters are electric. Electric heat is totally efficient. However, it's also totally expensive. If you have a 100-foot greenhouse, you don't want to heat it with electricity. Just imagine what your electric bill is in your home in the winter and multiply that times 20 or so, and you'll get an idea. So the problem is ethylene and carbon monoxide, and that's what we want to avoid. This is what it looks like when you get the twisting of the leaves, and this is what it looks like when the flowers turn yellow and dry up and fall off. So we don't want that. There are different ways of measuring ethylene, and I don't want to get too much into the weeds on this, but a chronic exposure is when they have a low dose, but it's over a long period of time. And that just takes 0.01 to 0.05 parts per million. That is a very small amount. Then the other way of measuring is acute exposure. If they get even 1 part per million, but it's for just 3 hours, you can get the same symptoms. So there's an estimate that 15 to 20% of heated greenhouses have air pollution problems. We don't want that. So make sure your greenhouse is vented. And if your heater's getting old, and in heater years, 8 years is about average for when you really need to take a good look and see if you're getting uh, little holes in the burner or in the stack, and replace the stack or patch it up however you can, because you don't want that exhaust gas. That's the older heater. The other way is a brand new heater, but it hasn't been adjusted. You want to adjust it to the hottest blue flame so that it burns the most gas as possible and you get more heat out of it. So here's the common scenario. A new grower puts in a propane heater, but it's unvented. In other words, you know, those gas, like a salamander heater, something you'd use to heat a barn or heat a warehouse, but you have garage doors wide open with trucks loading, or you've seen these packing sheds. They can do it, but the greenhouse is much more closed up. So within a few days of an unvented heater, the leaves start to droop, which is epinasty, but they don't feel wilted. So if your leaves are drooping and you touch them and they're not soft and wilty, but they're still turgid, that's a good symptom of ethylene damage. And then the flowers fall off and the upper leaves will twist around. A lot of twisted, distorted looking plants. It will be obvious. Another big problem is humidity in the greenhouse. And this is worse in the more humid climates in the southeast and even the northeast, where humidity is high. But the perfect humidity, people ask, well, perfect humidity is 70%. If you can get 70% or, give or take, that's excellent for greenhouse tomatoes. In this climate in Mississippi, that's not going to happen because it's always going to be very, very humid, way higher than 70% when you're trying to produce, even in the winter months. So you can't really maintain that in humid climate. So you do your best. Where's the moisture coming from? Transpiration. Transpiration is the movement of water into the roots, through the plant, and out the leaves. The leaves are constantly transpiring water when the sun shines on them to help cool the plant. So that's why we have transpiration. It helps to keep them healthy and cool. Transpiration is easier for the plant with low or maybe moderate humidity. But when you have high humidity, it's very hard for them to do transpiration because there's not a lot of difference in the moisture in the plant versus the moisture in the air. So that's when plants can get heat stressed. So high humidity is from transpiration and also evaporation. If you get a lot of water on the floor and the sun shines, it will evaporate, increase your humidity. And then moist surfaces like the tomatoes and the leaf surfaces, evaporation from those droplets. So this is what a very humid greenhouse looks like. Tomatoes with dripping water. You'll see leaves with water on them, especially in the mornings when you first go in at the crack of dawn when you go in, first light, you go in the greenhouse. And then if you look up at the plastic and it looks like this, oh boy, you have a problem. The droplets on the plastic, first of all, will reflect some of the light back out. So it's keeping some of the light from getting to your leaves where you really want it. It's in essence, it's shading the greenhouse. But secondly, this water on the inside surface will evaporate with your horizontal airflow fans pointing at them. Hopefully you have the fans, and then your air is even more humid. This used to be a very common disease in the greenhouses called leaf mold. At one time it was called cladosporium, but plant pathologists, I don't know if any of you are listening, but plant pathologists like to change the names of things every few years to keep horticulturists confused. So they have changed the name. I think it's fulvia now, but the main thing is the common name is still leaf mold, where you get yellow areas on the top, but if you flip it over, you'll see brownish tan hyphae growing right under each yellow spot. So that's from high humidity. Now, I said we used to see a lot of it. We don't see that much anymore because, as I said, the breeders have done such a good job with disease resistance in greenhouse tomato varieties. So almost all varieties have complete or nearly complete resistance to this disease. And that's good news. So how do you deal with humidity problems, since we know that that's going to cause some trouble? Well, if the humidity is too high, you get lower yield and lower fruit quality. The pollen, the pollen has to travel from the male part of the flower to the female part of the flower, usually in the same flower with tomatoes. The flowers are called perfect because they have all the male and female parts in the same flower. So if it's humid, the pollen sticks together and makes a heavier clump of pollen. And since it's heavier, it might sink to the floor or land on leaves instead of fertilizing the female part of the plant. That's why there's a problem with pollination. With low humidity, the stigma can dry out, so the pollen grains won't stick to it. That's if it's too low. So if you can have that humidity right in the sweet spot, you're best off. I'm not sure. I think Oklahoma is mostly lower humidity, but you have areas that have high humidity as well. So if you see condensation on the plastic or the fruit, you have a humidity problem. Controlling humidity will help with your fruit set quality and definitely reduce the diseases in the greenhouse, because a lot of fungi, most fungi, need a moist surface to reproduce. And if the surface dries out, they stop reproducing. So that's why you want to have your horizontal airflow fans, and that's what we're going to talk about now. The exhaust fans, when they're on, they move the plants, they help with temperature control, and they blow humidity out of the greenhouse. But there are times when the temperature is not too high and the exhaust fans will turn off. The temperature is lower than the set point on the thermostat. That's when you want your HAF or horizontal airflow fans to turn on. So you can either set them to turn on when the exhaust fans are off, or just have them on all the time. Either way is okay. So they mix the air up, they dry the leaf surfaces and the flowers, and help to cut down on this disease problem. Usually the high humidity is worse in the mornings, like when you first go in there, especially in the winter when it's cool outside. So how do you get rid of it? Turn on the exhaust fans first thing in the morning. So if you go in, you see moisture on the inside surfaces, turn the fans on. What if it's not hot enough for the fans? Doesn't matter. Turn them on, blow that moist air out even for 5 minutes, and then turn it off. If it's too cool in there, the heaters will come on for a little while and warm up the air. Well, that warm air will be drier than the moist air that you just blew out of the greenhouse with the exhaust fans. So that's a very effective way to lower your humidity. Now let's look at some of those troubles with tomatoes, just in case. Now, again, don't worry, you're going to get every one of these problems, because you won't. Let's see, what is it? Well, I think almost everybody knows this is blossom end rot. So calcium comes into the plant through the root hairs of the roots, and it travels in the xylem. But when the plants wilt, those root hairs can't take up calcium anymore, so they stop. And that's when you can get blossom end rot. So anything that interrupts the flow of water, such as wilted plants, will cause blossom end rot. So what's it look like? It's not soft and mushy. It is dry and leathery and blackish. And it's from lack of calcium in the fruit. So the calcium in your fertilizer mixture should be between 150 and 200 parts per million. If you're not familiar with these terms, look in the Greenhouse Tomato Handbook. I have several pages just discussing fertility and how to calculate your parts per million, and it's a good education. If the water source is already high in calcium, then you don't need to add so much. So you get your water tested in your water testing lab. If they show you you have high calcium, you don't have to add as much from the fertilizer. Other factors to cut down on blossom end is don't over fertilize with nitrogen, especially too much ammonium sources of the nitrogen. Don't let the plants wilt. So you might be putting down just the right amount of water per day, okay? But if you're watering only every 2 hours to get that correct amount, they're probably drying out between waterings. So if you talk to your agent, you say, my plants are wilting, and he or she says, how much water per day? And you say, well, it's about 2 quarts per plant per day. Well, the agent will say, well, that sounds just right. How many times a day are you watering? 4 times. Uh-oh. So they're wilting between waterings. So when I get those calls, I say, how often are you watering? If somebody says every 2 hours, I'll say, change it to every hour. You don't have to increase the total water per day, just the interval. Here we have a problem of dead and dying plants where the growing tip just turned brown and then black and quit. This should never happen. It's when the plants get no calcium, not just low calcium, but no calcium at all. The growing tip will die and the crop is toast. It's done with. So make sure you use your calcium nitrate. Here we have some very technical problems. Horticulturists with many, many years of grad school have learned that this is called cracking and this is called splitting. And I see Jim Schreffler and Lynn Brandenberger are included. I looked at the list during the break. And Mike, I guess you don't screen people when they sign up for these things. You just, I mean, anybody can just join in.
Yeah, as long as they have money on them, I accept it.
Oh, I see how it works. Okay. Well, next time you got to screen better. All right. So cracking and splitting. This is radial cracking because it radiates out from the calyx. Concentric cracking is when it makes circles around the fruit. So here we have radial cracking, and this is a very light split in the skin. You call it a skin split or splitting. So these are both caused from changes in the watering content. So you might be watering too little, and then you might be watering too much. Uh-oh, the plants are wilting. I'm going to double the water. Then you get a lot of fruit cracking or fruit splitting, or hopefully not both. But this is not marketable. This is not marketable. And when you have them both together, I mean, the only thing you can do with those is give them to your in-laws, because I mean, you can't do anything with that. Okay. Here we have some really, really ugly fruit. These are the bottoms of the fruit or the blossom end. We have dimpling, cracking, crevices, splitting open. They're really bad looking. So this is called catfacing, malformed fruit, especially on the bottoms. The main cause is cool temperature. So if the greenhouse owner is trying to save a few bucks by setting the thermostat at 55 instead of 64, yes, he will save a lot of money on the heat bill. However, your cull rate or your number 2 quality might go from 5% to 40% or 50%. And then you don't have as much good fruit to sell. So you're not making as much money. So we don't want those cold temperatures. Some varieties can get it more than others. Greenhouse varieties are very good quality. You don't see a lot of it unless the greenhouse is cold. The fruit still tastes fine. So you can eat this. If you're canning, you can use them. If you're using these in your salads, just cut out the bad part and they're just fine to eat. But don't try to sell them. Here we have a strange phenomenon in the tomato leaves where they roll up. Here's a severe case where they roll up almost like a tube. And this is what we call physiological leaf roll. It's not a disease. It happens a lot with high fertility and really good moisture. But the good thing is it doesn't affect yield or quality. We see this a lot in home gardens and commercial fields where they're very well fertilized. Doesn't hurt the plant. So it's not something to worry about. Now we have a fruit cluster with 2 fruit on it, but look at all these missed opportunities here where the flowers fell off. So this is called blossom drop. What makes blossoms fall off? You know it's going to reduce your yield if you get 1 or 2 fruit per cluster instead of 3 or 4. Temperature too high or temperature too low. So when the day temperature gets above 90, you get more of the pollen killed. When it hits about 95, almost all the pollen is killed. So even if you get pollination, you're not getting fertilization or fruit set. Dead pollen. Night temperatures over 75 will cause the same thing. So day temperatures over 90, night over 75. So again, aim for 64 for the ideal minimum set point in the greenhouse. Blossom drop can also happen from too little or too much nitrogen. That's why you want to have your tissue analyses done periodically to check. High humidity, that's where the pollen stick together and just sort of drop. Ethylene, we looked at already. The ethylene has a lot of problems with blossom drop. So blossom drop means the fruit will not form. No flowers, no fruit. So any stress on the plant can cause flowers to drop. They're like the first thing to go. Here we have small fruit. And I always like to show this, and when I'm with a live audience, well, I guess most of you are live, but when I'm in person, an in-person audience, I ask people what caused this. And usually somebody says, those are cherry tomatoes. Well, no, good guess, but they're not cherry tomatoes. And then usually there's a wise guy, especially in certain states I won't mention right now, who says, well, that guy has a really huge hand. No. This is a normal guy with a normal hand. And these tomatoes are small because they've had poor pollination. And just looking at this, you can train your eye to see the angle on the fruit. See that angle? See that angle? This angle. And then between the angles, it's flat. That's flat. This is flat. This is very flat. This is sunken down. These tomatoes did not get good pollination. So it's not necessarily fertility or water. They didn't pollinate often enough or at all. Sometimes people don't know they're supposed to pollinate. They don't pollinate at all. So slice the fruit open transversely, which means left to right, and look at the seeds. You don't have to count every seed, but if you open it up and there are no seeds or just a couple of seeds, that is bad pollination. And that means you want to pay attention to pollinating. Pollination should be done every other day towards the middle of the day if you're using a hand pollinator. Bumblebees set their own work schedule. I wouldn't mess with them. If you have bumblebees, let them take care of it without any micromanagement. They know what they're doing. Oh boy, now we have leaves with yellow in them, and there are a lot of different causes for yellow leaves. So let's start with interveinal yellowing. Interveinal means between the veins. So if most of the leaf is green, but the area between the veins is yellow, that's interveinal. So if the interveinal yellowing is at the top of the plant, the young leaves, it's probably either iron deficiency or a manganese deficiency. Not magnesium, manganese. Starts at the tops of the plants. If the yellowing is not at the top, but it's on older leaves, like 4th or 5th cluster especially, very likely that's magnesium deficiency. So it's good to train your eye with your tissue analysis. So if you have some yellowing, send in samples, get the tissue analysis back, and it will confirm what you thought it did, or it will refute what you thought it was, but that's the way you learn, by you're calibrating your eye to the data. How about if it's not intervanal? It's just yellowish, light green all over the plant. In that case, it's probably low nitrogen. If it's at the bottom of the plant, where the bottom leaves turn yellow, they're shaded and they're old. So the plant sort of kills them. The plant lets them go because it can't, those leaves can't get sun. So they're not photosynthesizing much anymore at all. So that is called senescence, which is it's old age. So they're done. It's okay to take them off. If the bottom leaves turn yellow, take them off. Another cause is disease. So the most common are early blight or target spot. They're both products of alternaria, but they're not exactly the same disease. But to a grower or a horticulturist, just look for the concentric rings, small brown circles on the lower leaves, and then the leaf yellows. These are the bottom leaves at first. And then after they yellow, they fall off. And before very long, you'll start to see these target spots higher up on the plant. You'll see brown spots and then concentric rings, and then they turn yellow. And it will go all the way to the top of the plant if you don't stop it. There are very good fungicides to control either of these alternaria caused fungal diseases. Now we're looking at fruit problems. This is a fruit with some yellowing or green, but other areas are red. So uneven ripening includes greenish stripes or streaks, green or yellow blotches, star-shaped areas, especially on the bottom of the fruit, green shoulders, several causes. So the grower can narrow this down by comparing the possible causes to the conditions the crop is being raised in. So it can be high nitrogen fertility, like too high, or low potassium fertility. And also high temperature will cause this because that red pigment, which we discussed earlier, the lycopene, cannot survive temperatures in the mid 90s. So the pigment itself disintegrates, and then you see the green pigment, the chlorophyll underneath it. And then there are some viruses and certain whiteflies that will cause uneven ripening too. So you want to maintain the right fertilizer levels, get your tissue analysis, watch for whiteflies, look for any kind of virusy symptoms like the crinkling of leaves and strappy leaves, anything that doesn't look normal, get some help. Now we have a fruit with a whole bunch of little cracks in it. They're fine cracks. These are not big cracks. And the fruit can feel like sandpaper, maybe like 100 grit sandpaper. This is called russeting. Now this is weird because people will pay more money for a potato if it's russet, and people will pay good money for pears that are russet, but it happens on tomatoes and nobody wants them. Well, the problem is the russeting causes these very fine cracks, and the tomato will lose water through those fine cracks. So the shelf life is terrible. You really can't sell them like this to a store or a stand because they will start to shrivel up. They're going to lose weight. If you're selling by the pound, that's not good either, but you don't want these in stores. These will fall apart. It's caused either by moisture on the fruit surface, like you see in the early mornings if the humidity is too high, or if you top the plant, like cut off the top of the plant because the season is almost over, and then you take all the suckers away too. Then there's nowhere for the water to escape from the plant. It's hard to transpire when you've taken off the top leaves of the plant. So that's another cause of russeting. So use your fans, and if you are topping the plant late season, leave two leaves above the highest cluster. So you don't want the fruit exposed at the top. You want a leaf and another leaf above that highest cluster. and that's where you cut the plant off. Sunscald is very similar to sunburn. Like humans get sunburn. You get a patch on your skin and it dries it out and turns red or pink, and it hurts. Well, on fruit, it turns white or tan color, and it can be leathery, and it's like a blistered area. Not surprisingly, it's usually on the top or the side of the fruit where the sun hits it. So it's too much sun hitting the fruit directly because there aren't enough leaves on the plant to protect it. So you want good leaf cover, and you don't want to prune, like don't go crazy pruning. I like to see pruning the lower leaves up to the current cluster that's still on the plant. So the lowest thing on the plant should be a fruit cluster. It shouldn't be like 3 or 4 fruit clusters in a row with no leaves between them, because those clusters of fruit are exposed to the bright sun. Now we have wilting. And the way you discover wilting is by walking through the greenhouse every day. So wilting can be abiotic, which means it's physical, excuse me, or it can be biotic, which means a disease. And the wilted part looks the same. So you can't just look at the leaf and say, oh, I got a disease. Because, excuse me, because if you look at the plant carefully, you might see a broken stem. That's a physical damage to the stem. And if you look at the plant and the upper part is wilted, but lower down it's not wilted at all, that's a broken stem. So find the break, and you can get this fancy florist tape and tape it up, and usually it'll grow back together. Tomatoes are pretty tough about growing back together. If you don't have floral tape and you have duct tape, use duct tape. It works too. On the other hand, if there's no broken plant and there are no clogged emitters that will also cause wilting, you may have a disease. So that's where you want to get some help to diagnose what it is. This one is less common. It happens more when it's cooler in the greenhouse, and it happens when the humidity is high. So cool and humid causes this, which is called edema. And by the way, people can get edema too on your skin. It doesn't look exactly like this, but it's bumps. It's a warty looking growth on the skin or on the leaf, and it does not hurt fruit production. So if you're getting this, don't panic. It's just one of those weird things that the leaves can do. Now this happens. Sometimes you get brown spots on here, but any pathologist will look at that and say, nope, that's not a disease. Nope, that's not a disease. That stem, nope, definitely not a disease. That is spray burn. So if you're using a backpack sprayer and the pressure is cranked up too high, you can cause abrasion to the surface and cause these burn marks. If it's not too bad, the leaves will grow out of it. The new leaves won't get it if you lower your pressure. However, fruit with this is not sellable. So it's okay to eat it when it ripens, but you really can't sell these cull type fruit. So be careful about high pressure with your sprays. This is my mystery question. We don't have a live in-person group, but just look at this. Look at this for a few seconds while I drink some water. How's that? Okay, some of you recognize this. Some of you have no idea what it is. So I'll tell you, this is Roundup damage. You know, Roundup or glyphosate or any of the brands that are made of glyphosate. Tomatoes should not get Roundup on them ever. Tomatoes are super sensitive to Roundup, so you never use it in the greenhouse. But guess what? Don't even use it outside the greenhouse when there's a crop in there, because it will get inside the greenhouse and cause yellowing of the growing tips and the shoot at the top of the plant, and the side shoots will all turn yellow. And if it's severe enough, the plant is over with, it's done. So no Roundup. Now we have some suggestions. You know, your neighbors have a bunch of house plants and it's getting cold for the winter. So they say, hey, can you hold these plants in your greenhouse? I see you have some tomatoes in there that you're growing to make a living. And I have these few plants. Can you just hold them over the winter? The answer is no, because these plants will have whiteflies, mealybugs, thrips, aphids, just all kinds of stuff. And they might like the tomatoes better. So the pest will migrate to your crop. And then you will have the problem of trying to eliminate the pests in the greenhouse that were so graciously given to you by somebody with the houseplants. And this is how you wire your greenhouse. Feel free to draw this on your pad of paper so you can remember the correct wiring techniques. Diagnostics resources. Don't forget, you have help when you need it. You have an agent or an area agent. You can take a picture with your phone or camera, send it to your agent, send it to friends in the business. There are email lists, there are Facebook groups, lots of information online. So if you have a problem, try to get help to figure it out as soon as possible so you can recover from that problem. I showed you this slide before, the English and Spanish versions of the handbook. This second one will be more helpful with these kind of tomato problems. And then, of course, you're welcome to these other ones. The environmental control can help too for talking about heating, cooling, vents, fan size, all of that stuff is in there. Shading, cooling, horizontal airflow fans. And then the budget is good if you want to know what your cost will be. These are all important. So start with the handbook and then work your way down. Here's what the Tomato Troubles publication looks like. And most of them have pictures. I think we all know blossom end rot by now. And we know what a misshapen fruit is, so there's no picture for it. But anyway, I hope that will help you. You can get them all here. Same website I showed before, or just Google greenhouse tomatoes, Mississippi, greenhouse tomato FAQ, which is frequently asked questions. And by the way, I've collected a whole bunch of questions that real growers have asked me over the years and put them on that webpage with answers. So like a question about, should I install lighting in the greenhouse? Well, that question is in there. Now, any questions you have, make sure you put them in the chat box and we'll try to address those. But these publications and the FAQ should be very helpful. The DVDs, you'll get them by email. You'll get the form by email. Either send me the email or give the email to Donna or Mike or somebody there, and they'll forward your request to me, and I'll send you the form. Worry, be a worrier. Check your work. Use the pH meter. Use the EC meter. Use the gallon jug. Very simple trick, won't cost you a penny. Walk the greenhouse every day. Look for wilting plants. Look for problems. Look for bugs. Look for mice. Look for raccoons. Look for anything. And I stick this in just for fun. What is it? Let's see. What problem is that? It's not a problem. These are good looking tomatoes. So that's what you want to be harvesting from your greenhouse. Excuse me. So with that, I could take questions, and anyway, Mike and Donna, any way you want to handle questions, they can be in the chat box, or I don't know if we can do it live with the number of people we have.
We're going to stick with the chat box, but at least one that I'm trying to scroll down and do a decent job. I noticed Joshua Campbell had a comment or a question about smart pots and fabric pots. Have you seen that, Rick? And if so, could you comment? I hope I didn't miss that. Slip through that.
No, you didn't miss it, but I missed something. What kind of pots?
He's talking about fabric pots. I'm trying to get back to, I was there and then it jumped on me. If somebody sees it before I do jump in.
Oh, it's in the chat box.
It is. Yeah, I'm looking here.
Smart pots.
Smart fabric pots or smart pots. And he's done, I don't know if you see it, Rick, he's done cucumbers, herbs, edible flowers, etc. He's wanting your opinion on them.
Let's see. I got to get back to that window.
Yeah, I struggled to see it at first for some reason. It jumped on me and I may be doing something. Okay, now I'm seeing others after Joshua. Now they're coming in.
I'm still trying to get to that window. Where did it go?
Yeah, it's at 3:08 p.m.
Trying to pull up. I don't know why that window won't pull up for me to see.
I can read it back to you if that helps.
Okay. Yeah, apparently I can't.
So Joshua Campbell, our colleague down in Oklahoma County Extension, he grew tomatoes, cucumbers, herbs, edible flowers, and fabric pots or smart pots at a farm he managed to sell to restaurants, yada, yada, love them. Just wondering your thoughts on them, Dr. Snyder, on smart pots or fabric pots, or have you messed with them?
Okay. I got back to there so I can see the chat window now. I have not used them. We don't have any growers who are using them. So I guess I can't say if they're good or bad for greenhouses. Is it something meant for commercial growers or more for the hobbyist?
They're out there. I personally not use them either though. So I wish I could comment intelligently. I cannot. I don't have the experience with them personally.
Okay, no, I've never done research with them or seen them in production. So
They said that they were greenhouse grown, and it's Julia Laughlin using Josh's. So
my mistake. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Donna.
okay. Ask Lynn Brandenburger. No, I don't know. He may not know either. I'm just saying that, but I'm not familiar with them.
Rick, I have another question that I don't think you can see. It came right afterwards. So Dana Hammonds mentions her husband does outdoor hydroponic tomatoes outdoors last year, to be specific. His tomato plants all twisted up and plants were distorted. How would they have ethylene distortion while in the open air?
Okay, so these are home garden or commercial tomatoes outside grown.
Outdoors, and why would they have ethylene distortion outdoors with the?
Okay, chances are it's not an ethylene problem, but just to cover all the bases, there are other ways to get ethylene problem. And I don't think this is going to be it, but if you have a pickup truck, for example, and you're running the engine and it's parked right by the garden and the exhaust is going into the garden, there's ethylene in that. So in rare occasions, a greenhouse has pickup trucks parked outside in the winter and they leave the engine on and the fans are blowing and the intake vent sucks all that exhaust right in and you can get severe ethylene damage. The next one is even less likely, forklifts. So they probably don't have forklifts out there, but those will cause ethylene damage. So there
Richard,
are other,
go ahead. Sorry.
the other causes of twisting are viruses and herbicides. So if there's any kind of twisting and distortion, the most common thing outside is 2,4-D damage or dicamba damage that will cause the twisting. Very common in home gardens. And sometimes people use 2,4-D around the yard. Sometimes people use a weed and feed on their turf to thicken up the grass and it kills the broadleaf weeds. Well, weed and feed has broadleaf weed killer. And guess what? Tomatoes are broadleaf as well. So those weed and feed fertilizers shouldn't be anywhere near a garden.
I was thinking phenoxies as well, just off the top of my head.
That's the most likely. The less likely is a virus. There are some viruses that cause twisting of the leaves. You can sort of look at the distribution of the problem and narrow it down. If the plants that get it are a very sporadic, one here, one there, but they're not next to each other, more likely a virus. If it's all the plants at the edge of the garden, like a whole row. It could be from that weed and feed fertilizer with the phenoxys blowing at it, or you know, there'll be more like big clusters of plants together from herbicide damage.
Thank you. There's one that I'm trying to read to you because I don't, again, mentioning, acknowledging this person's acknowledging tomatoes are impacted by many viruses. Can you please talk about this? Is there any way to control it other than removing the plants? I think it would be a major problem in hydroponics as water is circulated and some viruses are transmitted via the water.
There's nothing you can spray to get rid of a virus. Like what should I spray? Well, fungicides kill fungi. They won't touch a virus at all. So you can't kill it. And copper containing mixtures are pretty good on bacterial diseases. They won't interfere with a virus. So you can't spray it. Once it's in the plant, the virus is there for keeps. So the thing to do is remove the plant. I mean, if you know it's a virus, take the plant out, take the roots and everything, and take them out of the greenhouse. A lot of viruses are spread by insects like whiteflies or thrips.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're thinking I might have a virus, see if you have any whiteflies, see if you have any thrips, because that would reinforce that hunch that it's a virus. But let your pathologist look at it too, because they're expert at figuring these things out, what kind of disease it is. And I'm not familiar with viruses traveling in water. So I've not heard of that. They travel on seeds, sometimes contaminated seeds, but that's very unlikely. More likely it's insect transmitted.
Well, we have at least one entomologist and at least one plant path that can jump in now or later with these people.
Yeah. If I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. But I don't think it travels in water.
Now, Donna and Peter, help me. Do you see any other questions that I've overlooked on the chat box?
No, I think you've gotten them all.
Yeah, I think that's gonna be it.
I think so. So I have a couple of quick parting comments, and as I make these, this is your last chance to throw in a question to Dr. Snyder. For those of you that had to pick and choose, because we're all busy on the balance of the webinars, keep in mind you can go back and add webinars that you initially chose not to, but you'd have to do it with a different email address. And I hope that you're all poised to hear Jim Ord in about 3 weeks, a very accomplished plants person, horticulturist. He helped me a lot early in my career. He spent many years in Oklahoma as well as outside our borders. So really well-balanced horticulturist. So we're looking forward to Jim's talk. I want to thank Donna Dollins and Peter Harwell again for their time. This took a lot of effort to put this together. And on that note, we are going to close down in a minute unless I see.
Mike.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Jennifer Olson responded that some viruses are spread by water, but insect and seed transmission is much more likely.
Thank you, Jen.
Jennifer is your pathologist?
Yes.
Okay, then she knows what she's talking about.
Yes, she's award-winning.
And I will point out Jim Schreffler also confirmed the common herbicide problems.
I saw that. I just skipped it because I'm sorry, Jim. I should have acknowledged you on that. Thank you. Rick, we're really grateful for your time today. And you've told us how we can stay in touch with you. You've told us follow-up resources. And so we're excited and again, grateful for your efforts and excited to see what you do with the balance of your career. So
me too. I'm curious what's going to happen with the balance of my career too.
Yeah. But we appreciate you. And if we're done, I think I'm going to go ahead and close this webinar then.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I really enjoyed talking to your group, and pretty good turnout. We had 50-something people earlier.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. And we have advanced to cell phones, by the way. You made that comment.
Cell phones there now?
Yeah, we absolutely, yeah.
Okay, I don't think Arkansas has them yet.
Well, that's probably a given, but
yeah.
So thank you for your time, and we're appreciative, and we'll talk to you again, and we'll see everybody February 11th with Jim Ord. All right.
Thanks for your attention.
You bet. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.